Almost done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That deserves a round of applause. And also joined by Gabino Arredondo, who works for the city of Richmond, California, in the city manager's office. And so there, as project manager, he leads the coordination for the successful implementation of Richmond's health in all policies, strategy, and ordinance. So I think we're going to kick this conversation up with a really terrific video that will give you a sense of what's happening at Elm Play Lot and the Pogo Park model. So if we can run that video.
The Iron Triangle neighborhood of Richmond, one of the most disadvantaged neighborhoods in all of California. In the heart of this neighborhood is Elm Play Lot.
When I was younger, the park wasn't really safe.
No one really liked to come there.
It was infested with drug dealers and drugs.
No child could play here. Parks, especially playgrounds, are one of the most important public spaces. They have the catalytic power to change entire communities.
I met Tootie at the Never Community Center. I was one of the kids in the community. She told us about this project that she wanted to do. She wanted some community input, so she got me and several of my friends and my mom and my aunt, and we all came together.
And then we sat down and we came up with like a core thing. What does every great park need?
A lot of people seen what we were doing, and people wanted their help.
It's for the community, by the community. So in some way, we're building the parks now from the inside out.
I don't think anyone thought that this is what a park could look like or could feel like.
We give art classes and Zumba.
We have a mobile petting zoo that comes around. We have free haircuts on Friday.
From 0 to 100, everybody's allowed to participate.
So we're trying to become like the hub, so that way that children in this community can come to a Pogo Park and anytime find that there's programming happening for free at a drop-in basis.
Seeing where it was and how it is now, it's beautiful.
All the kids are excited, like, let's go to Pogo Park, let's go to Elm, let's go play. There's so many things there.
We want to make these two parks in the Iron Triangle as best as they can be, and then from that point, inform how to do it in other communities. Children have to have a place where they can be free, so they can just go out and play, breathe the air, and feel the sun on their face. It's sending a message out to all the children. This community is investing in you.
Terrific. So, Joe, tell us a little bit more about Pogo Park.
All right, great. Well, good afternoon. I can never prepare myself for seeing myself on camera. I was like, it's coming. I don't know when.
And Joe, it's very meta because you are also being webcast while you were on camera and sitting here.
Blowing my mind right now. Just to kind of highlight some of the points that you saw in that video, and I thought it was really great to show that video so you would see what the park actually looks like today. Hear from our executive director, Tootie Marr, and from Brandon Harris, who's actually the first person I worked with at Pogo Park back in 2008. So I started with Pogo Park as a community volunteer doing a community photo voice project when we were still trying to figure out what are the barriers and assets to redeveloping in this community. So some of the key aspects of Pogo Park, first, is to differentiate Pogo Park, the organization, from Elm Play Lot, the actual physical park. So Pogo Park is a steward of two public parks in the city of Richmond. What you saw there was primarily Elm Play Lot, and we have a second park in the same neighborhood, and we have a Safe Streets program called Yellow Brick Road, which we could get into a little bit later. But just to make that distinction, second, with the Pogo Park process, community members have been involved in the design, the build, and the evaluation of the park. And it's an iterative process, right? We're moving in one direction, but as the community changes, so does the vision of how the space will be used. So that's a key aspect to what we do. And we could talk a little bit more about how that process goes as we move forward. And then lastly, a big part of this is not just the redevelopment of the physical space, which has been hugely important, but also the transformation of the social environment, right? One of the things that you heard Brandon say there is that he's involved, his mom's involved, his aunt's involved. really tapping into these deep social networks within the community, because Richmond isn't that big of a city. Right, we're roughly around 100,000 people in the community. So being able to tap into these deep social networks of people and expertise has really been key to the work we do. And now I'm going to turn it over to Gabino, who's going to talk about, here what you see is what we've done at Pogo Park, but this has been done within a larger environment that really enabled this to happen. And Gabino's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Hello, buenas tardes, good afternoon. My name is Griffin Arredondo. Again, work at the city of Richmond, California, and I actually started as an intern. That's how I always promote internships for all these projects. I started as an intern in the planning department. That's how I was like, yay, Detroit has a planner up here in this work. And also talk about the role that the city of Richmond, I brought some slides up. I don't know if they're up for a PowerPoint, but the bigger context in Richmond when Pogo Park was starting is that in California, we have our general plans, and there's going to be a general plan update. So a general plan was mainly looked at as a land use document. It had 7 elements that are required by the state. But in Richmond always likes to put their own flavor on it. They have 14 elements, and they're one of the first cities in the state to include a community health and wellness element of the general plan. And the general plan is basically the constitution of our city. What are we going to be working on for 30 years? It's not 50, but 30 years. And now it's instituted in our city documents that this is the work that we should be doing in different neighborhoods. And to pilot implementation this work, we picked 2 neighborhoods. One was the Iron Triangle, and the other one was Belding Woods. And Belding Woods is next to the Pogo Park neighborhood. And part of the work that we had to do as city staff is we had to...
the clicker's next to you if you want to.
Okay. So again, that's Richmond in the corner. How many of you have been to the Bay Area? Okay, great. Last BART stop after Berkeley, three stops, 11 minutes, Richmond line, right? So that's us, but nobody goes there, right, as much. I mean, we've seen that change, but before there's a lot of history of issues dealing with violence, but then there's a lot of history of resistance, environmental justice organizations. I think that's one thing that has helped Richmond. We host a large refinery, the Chevron refinery, one of the largest greenhouse gas emitters in the whole state. So there's always been a community, it's right by the Iron Triangle. And so there's been a lot of history of organizing in our city, and what one of the things that attracted me to stay in the city of Richmond is that is within our city council, that's within our city staff. And this, I think for me, a big catalyst was the change of our general plan, which we got some support from foundations like the California Endowment. We were part of the Building Healthy Communities work. So that helped fund some of that work to be able to move forward, because as people mentioned, cities are tight in budgets. I think we've cut down like 500 or 300 employees over the term of the last 12 years. So, you know, the work gets more, but, you know, there's less staff. So support from foundations and other places has been pivotal to keep this momentum going. And also that you have staff in the city that's supporting the CBOs and the residents in this work. And I think that's something that we have been able to learn from. So just a background, we're about 100,000 people. We have 32 miles of coastline. So sometimes people talk about cities. We have a lot of parks, right, in our city. Actually, that's an asset, and shoreline, but they're not all optimal. So Elm Play Lot is not the same as the Marina Bay Park, right? So you guys know what I'm talking about, all right? And we also have a city manager council form of government. And I always mention this because when I talk to residents and community organizers, that's very important to know the political landscape of how things move in your local city if you want to create change, right? So, you know, in more mayor strong form of government cities, you know, having the support of the mayors, I mean, always having the support of the mayor is important. But in city manager form of government, you still need 4 votes to pass anything, right? So you also need the support of the whole community. And luckily in this work, we've been able to get 7 zeros. So, you know, being able to get support from across the city council. And so this is the Iron Triangle, right? So we talk about space and place. So this is the BART line. These are all old Union Pacific rail lines that have this neighborhood right here encapsulated, right? So it's actually like a physical border, right? And so there's a beginning transformation here. This rail line area is now a Rails to Trail project. It's like a greenway that also Pogo Park has a park in. And this is Elm Play Lot right here, right? And this is Perry's Elementary School, and this is Lucas Park, and the Nevin Community Center, which is another, neighborhood asset, is here. And so when we started implementing the community health and wellness element, city staff, we were deployed to the school. And that was, that might not sound like innovative or something, but in our city, everything was separate. The school district had their staff doing their things. The city staff had their own things. And the county health department had their own things. And we actually didn't know each other, right? It's interesting that there would be 3 meetings probably for the same issue when we're serving the same family, right? So there's like I remember Guadalupe Corral. She's a very active person at Perry's. She's a Pogo Park staff member, right? She's involved in the same resident that's probably the most active in that community is hitting those systems. So part of this community health and wellness work is it got us together in the same room. Some of the foundation money helped us hire FTE staff time from each system so we could do our own thing besides the CBOs. Because what we've seen that a lot of the foundation money has come in, and I don't know why I'm talking a lot about foundations today, but funds the community groups to do capacity building, which is great, right? But after the capacity grows for the community, who are they going to be asking stuff from to change, right? The systems. And if the systems aren't ready to receive that input, boom, it's going to be clash. And that has been historically in Richmond where we started. The environmental justice groups are like, yeah, Chevron and, air monitoring and everything. And then we're like, well, we don't know. But after, as this process is going, I see that's changed. There's been capacity building from the city staff side and also the CBO side. And now I think we start at the table first, and it's okay to go at it later on if the change doesn't happen. But in the beginning, I think that's been the difference in doing this health equity work. And also we in the beginning, we wouldn't say health equity. We wouldn't say institutionalized racism. We wouldn't say that. We would say health, right? That's the beginning, right? Who's against health, right? Nobody's against health. At least I haven't found that yet. Now we're able to do that because we're using these terms and people are seeing this evolve throughout the years. And so, again, I talk a lot about city staff because I'm a city staff person, but a lot of these city staff people haven't even been in the Pogo Park. They haven't even been at the school site since they were students, right? So part of this work was that Pogo Park lends us actually it's a city property, but actually people now don't call it an Elm Park, they call it Pogo Park. It's a city property, but now it's been taken over by this CBO organization. Now everything, we could do it there, we could do it at a school site, and we're able to communicate better now because of this work, and we're actually seeing a physical change. And lastly, I would talk about data. When we started this work, people, especially our public health allies, would say, you're not going to see change in 10 years to diabetes. You're not going to say in heart disease. Like some of these health outcomes take years in order to move. So we got to think of other metrics to think about, right? For me, built environment is number one. So if you're seeing that their streets are changing, the park is changing, there's solar on your house, that means people are investing in you and care for you, and you could document that. How many bike lanes, how many roads, participation in meetings, you could count that. And now we're able to see we're in our 12th year, and we're working closely with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to document some of our highlights, and I think we're going to be able to show some of that change that we're seeing, we're feeling, but we haven't been able to show it in the traditional way. But for me, being able to see the stories and the narratives of the residents changing, I think that supports that work.
Thank you. So I want to circle back first to something that I heard in the video, which was about the importance of play. So, again, as we're thinking about the multifaceted word of equity and process of equity, I just want to remind us all that play itself is an equity issue, right? Not all kids have access to play regularly, to play freely, to play safely. And it seems that in Elm Play Law and the Pogo Park model, you have really prioritized kids' ability to do all of those things, but also actually engaging youth in the process. And I wonder if you can just talk about, how you've engaged youth, how they participate in, to your point, the co-design and the co-stewardship, and why play has been such an important part of what you do.
Okay, absolutely. So in terms of Pogo Park, the process of even planning the play space was really iterative and continues to be iterative. We say history-wise, as far as completing Elm Play Lot, primary completion of the physical space was done in 2014, but we continue to add and change elements, every year or so. And so as far as making sure that there was space for that, it really had to do with designing with the community, not for the community, right? Having those formal, like some of those formal community meetings that most of us are familiar with as far as doing modeling, right? And in different ways, engaging in, as we were talking about arts earlier, different ways of 3D modeling, from the very formal scale modeling to, get as many pipe cleaners as you can, right? But then we understand that not everybody sees things well in models. So we also did pop-up parks, right? Let's try some games, or let's try a temporary structure and see how it works, right? Now when we get ready to do or to build more of our formal structures, let's bring in our partners from Scientific Art Studios, which is a private business in the Iron Triangle that's a custom fabrication business. They do a lot of the playgrounds and set pieces for museums throughout the Bay Area.
A lot of us didn't even know they were there.
They were a member of the community, but not someone we interacted with, right? If anyone, so for the folks who've been to San Francisco Bay Area, if you've seen the San Francisco Giants baseball park, the glove in the outfield is built by Scientific Art Studios. And now they're the primary partner that we work with to actually build these pieces. So when we say we're building, we mean like everything but the zip line was built by members of Pogo Park. Most of those designs come from designs that members of the community have brought together. And what that's turned into is, as far as accessibility, say, for instance, in our park in Elm Play Lot, we have swings, but we have disc swings. And so these are large circles that encourage group play, so it can fit up to 4 children, but they're also actually accessible for children with disabilities, right? Unlike a regular swing. Intentionally, we don't have a big plastic slide play structure in the middle. Instead of that, we have many pieces that we can bring in and out in order to transform that space depending on what we're doing. And that's actually one of the key pieces of Pogo Park, is that through this model, parks must be staffed. And they must be staffed by paid members of the community, right? So these are people who have more than one identity in the community. They're not packing up at the end of the day and leaving. They're walking home.
Dropping off their kids and leaving.
Yeah, they're walking home. They are, one of my coworkers a couple of months ago told me, she was like, yeah, on a Saturday, some kids came and they started knocking on my door, and they needed help at the park. And she was like, I wasn't working. I thought she was complaining at first. No, she was happy about it. She was like, no, they knew I was there. I knew that they needed help because I could see them from my door, right? So that's the key piece of it, is that having parks programmed are what keep them alive. And
then for me, on the city side, somebody's staffing the park for you. You know what I mean? It's like, you know what I mean? Hey, I was like, wow. No, just kidding. But this helps, right? The maintenance of this park. Before, there's been these rejuvenation programs where they put a new slide thing, and then it's graffitied up the next time, right? And for me, that they help build the park right away. The people could call me, hey, there's people dumping, or we know where that's coming from. Then I could talk to code enforcement, or I could talk to our folks at police, or other different areas in the city where we could support to keep the maintenance of the park. Also on the city side, all the legal aspects. They said they wanted a zip line. I'm like, what? Like, there's no zip line, right? There's no zip line. There was no zip line in the area. Actually, I think it might be one of the few ones in the Bay Area. And they got this thing from Germany, and they were going to put it. And then, everybody's now, right, city attorney's office, liabilities, RLOs, But when you develop that relationship we have an interdepartmental health and all policy strategy team, where I have representatives from all the different departments, and we meet monthly. We bring this up. Okay, how are we going to deal with this? How could we see this? Have other cities tried it? Because usually cities like to copy each other. So if you see another city that's doing it, it's most likely people their level goes down of being anxious. So bringing those examples in have helped us be able to help make sure that those spaces continue, that there is a zip line,
So you just sort of transitioned right into the next question that I want to go into, which it goes back to what you were saying about the role of the city, right? There are things that the city can do well. There are things that the city needs partners for. There are things that the city needs additional capacity building itself to continue to grow. And I think that really can get lost in conversation, I think, particularly with funders, that cities actually, do want to be active partners and do want to build their capacity. And I wonder if you just have, from this experience, any advice you want to share, not only the funders, but just to other partners out there on how to effectively start working with cities. A lot of people just haven't had public sector experience, so they don't totally understand how you're thinking and why you're thinking that way.
Yes, actually, before, also part of the training was to get our city manager and city staff to have an outside person, as Professor Jason Corbin from Berkeley in Public Health. He came in and did a training with them. And usually you don't hear about that. You hear training for the staff at other staffing levels. But we first started in the department head level and city manager level. So when the city manager was able to say, hey, we're all clinicians, we're all health providers, from the people cleaning the streets to the people in maintenance to the people in library to the people in procurement and finance, we're all clinicians, we're all community clinicians, and we're going to be working on this. When he does it, when it was a he before, when he does it in the staff meeting of 800 people, right, that's what we're going to be working on. To me, that kind of changes the climate. So being able to get funding to do that training Professor Corbett did, he did it, because he's one of our partners. But now at the other staffing levels, like right now we're getting some support to do GARE training, Government Alliance on Race and Equity. So having explicit discussions about race and institutionalized racism within our city has helped a whole cohort of staff be able to bring that in their own departments. And even if they might not even interact with Pogo or the other groups, it helps when people go to City Hall and interact with folks. And I think it's an organization that has a leadership structure, right? So you could mandate, like, hey, we're going to be working on this. This is some of the things that we have prioritized already in our general plan, and it's part of the implementation. But I think that a little bit of funding for that goes a long way.
That's great. So one of the other things you mentioned is the importance of understanding the actual structure of city government and sort of how you're going to get support. And we haven't really talked a lot today about political buy-in. So can you, each of you, actually sort of talk about what is your strategy for getting those council votes?
Have them go on the zip line.
I was like, yeah. I think buy-in for us, I think that's where some of the benefit is from having a smaller city. And I would say also, I'm a native of Richmond, right? So there's a lot of pride in the city. And I think once you get into the nonprofit community-based world, those connections come fast. So one of the things that Gabino and I were talking about is that all of us have a sense of responsibility for the city, right? A sense of responsibility for the care and the health of the members of the city. And so I think having the conversation in that space really helps. I don't think that the work we're doing is overtly political, where there would be huge blowback from what we're doing. Like, because we are working primarily in parks, no one's really going to be mad at us that we're providing snacks and lunches for kids, right? If they are, maybe they come on a Tuesday when I'm not there, right? So a lot of what we're doing makes sense, right? It makes sense. And then particularly because we have these ongoing relationships. So Gabino and I see each other and we talk, right? We know what's going on. And Gabino will show up at the park not as someone from the city of Richmond, but as a community member, right? Because we have these conversations, because we have this connection to UC Berkeley, and we understand where Pogo Park's work fits within, this issue of addressing toxic stress at a community level, then we understand how we enter the conversation. And so I think that's what's really been key for us, is understanding how do we enter this conversation, who are we talking with, but at the same time, are we being true to ourselves, right? We're not trying to adapt ourselves to every conversation, but mainly just understand this is why we're at this table, and this is why we have this seat. And when we're sitting there, it's not just myself, but it's other members of the community, right, who can share our messages in different ways. And I think that the city and other stakeholders have been really receptive to that.
I think also what I mentioned in the beginning, when we're trying to create this change or this work, it's institutionalized in our city documents. So health and health policies is a strategy and it's an ordinance. the community health and wellness is a part of our general plan. So we already have the support. It already passed city council. This is what we're supposed to be working on. So that's at one level. For the most skeptics, I had a slide on funding. I think taking a health perspective in California actually gets you more money from the state, because now it's a requirement of all the state like cap and trade money, millions and millions and millions of dollars. Prop 84 grants for parks, for job training, for housing. You'll see that question come up in state grants. And I think it makes Richmond's application strong right now, because also there's now more community engagement requirements in these state applications. So we're able to show the community engagement. We're able to show that we're focused on health and it's institutionalized. And this slide is an old slide, but I think we're hitting almost a $20 million mark on getting money that traditionally wasn't coming in for these explicit purposes like Caltrans. Caltrans, what do you think about Caltrans? You probably don't think about Caltrans, but when you think about Caltrans, is highways in California, right? That's all you think they do. But they have a whole set of money, right, to do pedestrian and mobility, multimodal mobility funding, right? So in their next project, Pogo was able to get environmental justice grant from Caltrans to help do the Yellow Brick Road. And this is another role of the city. The CBOs can't apply for this money. The CBOs can't apply for the Caltrans and the Prop 84 grant and the other grant. The city has to apply, right? So you have to develop a partnership where we're going to all apply together, and when the money comes in, this is where it's going to go, and this is where we're going to invest, and what areas it's going to go to. And that has taken a long time to build. I think it's been like 12 years. So there's some grants that I'm going to apply to, but there's some grants that they're going to apply to that still help the same purpose, but that we might not be able to access, and they're able to use it in another way.
That's great. We're going to open it up to Q&A soon. But Joe, I wanted to circle back. You mentioned the Yellow Brick Road. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the Yellow Brick Road is a Safe Passages project. And essentially, think about the Wizard of Oz and Yellow Brick Road. Okay. So what the Yellow Brick Road will do is it'll be a Safe Passages project that connects the two parks that Pogo Park is the steward of. This pathway was actually developed by youth in the community through a summer program. I don't know how long ago, but Brandon, who was about my age, was one of the youth at the time. So it's been around for a while. But what's very unique about this is that the actual path that was chosen is a smaller street that is directly adjacent to one of the major thoroughfares. Now, the young people, when they were trying to figure out what's the safest way to get from point A to point B, they recognize that if we put this path on that major thoroughfare, there would just be too much traffic, right? And which would lead to increased pedestrian injuries. So they designed out this whole pathway, and now what we're doing is we're actually running with that design idea. And when we say Yellow Brick Road, we literally mean Yellow Brick Road. Something, if we're bringing that art aspect back into it, that you will see a literal yellow street, and that's the Safe Passageway. Along that street is also Kaiser Permanente, the only hospital in the city of Richmond. We have faith-based churches along that street. We have a daycare along that street. So it's connecting all of these different resources. And so what we want is for community members to be able to move from resource to resource in a safe manner, knowing that this is a pathway that they could use any time of the day.
And then also a broader vision is, Richmond is kind of known like south, central, north. Pogo Park is in the central area, but they also want to connect with the other parts of the city. So this Yellow Brick Road also goes by Marina Way, which connects us all the way to the marina. And there's all this development happening in the marina, and everybody should have access to it. And part of the Yellow Brick Road is also to connect people from central Richmond to the marina area, and intentionally.
Great. So I think we are going to go ahead and open it up to Q&A, but also to reflection. So if you heard something from any of our case studies that you just want to amplify or expand upon, feel free to share that. And if you've got a question for any of our three case studies, just direct it to whom you'd like to answer it. So right down in front.
My name is Dory Hughes. Thank you so much again for a third amazing panel It's so informative and inspiring. My question, I believe, Gabino, you mentioned it, but it could be for any. You talked about when you are reaching out, you do it within the context of health. You talk about who would be against health. But I'm also hearing others who say that when we talk about health and health equity, we should be more explicit. That we're also talking about race and racism and discrimination, and that we should be very clear about what we're talking about. So I wondered how you balance that tension in your work, that getting to the core of the issue, but in ways that resonate with your counsel or others. That's one question. The other question, I'm not sure who that belongs to, but I believe in the Detroit example, there was a mention of CDFI investment. I could imagine for other private funders. I wondered what type of returns or expectations that you have when you're accepting private funding, and if that is ever a consideration for the work that you do.
Great. I mean, I would start with the, I guess, sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit. I think in Citywide in the beginning, I think it began more implicit. But I think as the outreach has happened, residents are the ones that are saying it. Like, this was one of the exercises we had, a toxic stress exercise that we did. Instead of just doing the traditional survey, we got these skeletons, and we had people fill them out in whatever language. We just had the body, the little skeleton, and people put in, what's your number one stress in Richmond? And people, get to put a bunch of stuff up. And one of them came up, racial profiling, issues with police, issue with violence. So it's actually also coming from the residents, their perspective. So residents are talking about it explicitly in their neighborhoods. We could talk about it explicitly in our neighborhoods also. And, it might lead to some uncomfortable conversations. But for me, I've always been in the matter that tension brings up change. Tension could bring up positive change, especially in institutions. And then us as city folks, once we were able to get all these toxic stresses that explicitly talk about race, then we went back to the city and be able to say what program could help that toxic stress that specifically was told us by that neighborhood. So racial profiling was one of them. So in our police, we have implicit bias training, right? Talk about race also at the police force. And they invited community members to do the training with the police officers, which was a weird experience because I come from LA, so LAPD history when I was growing up there was very different. I don't know if it's changed, but that was interesting, having the residents have trainings with police officers on implicit bias training. And also racial profiling, another big issue we found was that people didn't have identification, so that's why they were being stopped for a longer time. And then we're able to combine this municipal ID with a banking system. So people could also use this ID as getting, instead of using the check cashing places. And actually that helped pay for that municipal ID to be able to run it, right? So, just little things like that where we're able to talk, the residents are talking about it, and also city staff is talking about it. So one of the, I think, asset about Richmond is the city staff actually reflect the population we're serving. So we still have, like I could be in a meeting with department heads and it's multicultural, it's diverse, and that's one of the things why I think I've also stayed in the city of Richmond to work. And I think those people talk about their experiences also growing up, and right now I think we have a safe space for it. And now we're getting training, right, in the staff level, so that also helps.
And I think go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, from our perspective, when we're talking about health, we do use the ecological model to think about, downstream, public health background, downstream thinking about biomedical model, but then also thinking about population health. So when we're looking at living conditions, social inequities, institutional inequities, those kinds of things, we might not necessarily start with that vocabulary. I think, like Gabino said, we've built some of that vocabulary over the years. But a lot of this comes out. So when I'm looking at this, we're actually analyzing over the summer a youth photo voice project that we did to try to address the sources of and solutions to toxic stress within the Iron Triangle through the eyes of young people. A lot of these things came up. Right now, we had to get on the same page, because when you say toxic stress in Richmond, you hear toxic, you do start to think about Chevron. right? You start to think about air pollution immediately. But then how do we work through that, right? How do we understand the difference between toxic stress versus tolerable stress versus positive stress? And really making time to have that conversation. Before I'm asking you to get into an answer, let's make time to make sure that we're on the same page about the conversation we're having. As far as the second point that you made, as far as funding, and like some of the issues there, I think Pogo Park is still a nonprofit organization, so that's always going to be one of our concerns. I would say one of the benefits is that when it comes to funding, particularly if there's some concern about where we're getting the money from, Pogo has a very democratic and like flat structure for making decisions. Most of our meetings are all team meetings. So we have 15 full-time staff members. And without, going into too many details, I've been in a meeting where some people did question if we were going to work with somebody who could provide us resources, and decided to walk away from it because of that. Now, it's not easy, right? Everything has an intended consequence and an unintended consequence. One of the ways, though, that long-term we're trying to build a more sustainable model is we have another arm called Pogo Park Products, which now we have all this experience and expertise in building out a park, in doing all of this metalwork, woodwork. We have technical assistance, right? We can provide that. We actually also build these products that can be purchased and put in other parks. So can we build ourselves a sustainable funding stream that allows us to move forward in our mission without having to, adjust here or adjust there all the time for different forms of funding?
You could have a Pogo Park bench at your park if you want.
Absolutely.
Hi, Pamela Russo from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We've been hearing about Pogo Park for a long time. I recently saw a groundwork video, which maybe is Unity Park. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yeah, groundwork's working in the Greenway, and Unity Park is one of the parks. Yes.
Okay, because I suddenly thought, how many parks does Richmond have now? They're all
probably around 30 parks or more than that.
But that are community-led, community-driven.
They're not all community-led, community-driven.
So there's like 4 of those now?
Would think about maybe, we have like adopt a park, adopt a spot. So the ones that have explicit CBO engagement, maybe about 10, but they're all different levels, and that's okay. Some of them are just city maintained, traditional, and some of them are more, active like Pogo and groundwork.
Can you talk about your relationship with groundwork? What they've brought to the table for you? I know they do a lot of brownfields and.
Yeah, so Groundworks Richmond is an organization that is, I think it's a national organization, right? It's in different areas. One of the things that we're getting more connected with them, they're also at Unity Park, which is the main park in the bottom of the Iron Triangle because it traverses different neighborhoods. Our recent project with them is air monitoring. So there's BACMed, which is our regional air monitoring agency, only has about a few monitors, in our city. So what Groundworks Richmond wants to do now is they're training young people. They call the air raiders. They got 200 of these devices, and they're just putting them up all over the city, and making sure to give data about how do we reduce toxics, how do we reduce air contaminants, and they're using that data in their smartphones and connecting them, and giving that to BACMed, to the city, to the refineries, to different things. So Groundwork has started, doing land brownfield remediation, but they're expanding to do other health impact modeling.
Last question. So, have you found sort of a network of organizations like yourselves in other places? No, I mean other places where communities are interested in parks as a.
Yeah, we actually host a lot of organizations throughout the year. I think one of the big networks we're actually connected to is this Global Learning Exchange through the Institute of Urban and Regional Development at UC Berkeley. And so actually myself and Gabino were part of a team from Richmond that traveled to Nairobi and it was they came and visited us first. Members of a team from Nairobi, from South Africa, and India. Yeah. So to try to learn basically different sets of expertise. And one of the big things they want to learn from us is how do you do community government partnership. some of the things we learn from them are just different ways that you engage with community members. Some things about how do they get community investment happening in communities where there aren't banks and things like that. So the National Forestry Services brings their fellows out to us once a summer to talk about, I guess you call it, urban green. Urban green spaces. So we get to share our experiences there, and that's another global group. And then I think more locally on the day-to-day, as I mentioned earlier, the network of community-based organizations in Richmond is very collaborative. It's not necessarily a competitive network like that. A lot of it happens because a lot of us are from Richmond. A lot of us have worked at multiple organizations, right? So it's like, oh, I used to work with him. I used to work with her. I know that they're working on this right now. Let's figure out how do we work together. And I think it's because we're not there for the money, right? We're in the nonprofit world because we care about this community. So I think that really leads to a lot of innovation when we're trying to figure out how do we do more how do we basically be bigger than the sum of our parts.
And I would just add from the Reimagining the Civic Commons perspective, we're definitely seeing what I would call more of a movement towards really rethinking all of our public spaces, not just parks. So, we're demonstrating in 5 cities, but, it's our ambition to inspire every city that wants to reimagine their public spaces. And we're seeing that happen, right? I think you're seeing more models like what's happening with Pogo Park, like what's happening in Detroit, in our other 4 communities. I think this is also global. A few years ago, I participated in a workshop with the Salzburg Global Seminar that was focused on urban parks and kids and health. We had people from, I think, 27 or 30 different countries there. And so you're seeing movements in London, right, to make London a national park city, right, so that there's a park network all over what is a very urban space. And so I really think that it's burgeoning, but what is promising to me about it is that it is equity focused, it is multidisciplinary and multi-sector. That feels different than sort of our previous forays into expanding our park systems, and that's exciting to me. I think we've got our next question down front. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, my name's Doug Judy. I run the Build Healthy Places Network with Colby Daly, who's going to be our next moderator. We're based in San Francisco, and I was texting her earlier saying we need to go visit Pogo Park, which we've not done before. But as I pulled up the website, I saw that Pogo Park is officially a community development corporation. And CDCs is actually exactly what Colby and I do, is we work with community development corporations nationally with health and healthcare and nonprofit banks, community development financial institutions. But there's at least 4,000 to 5,000 of these CDCs across the country. So Pogo Park's awesome, but there's going to be one or more of these in your own communities. And so I was curious whether you guys have actively engaged some of the networks of CDCs, of community development corporations, either in California or nationally, because it would be another route to take what you've learned to other very receptive organizations.
I haven't personally, and so, but I think, I'll definitely bring that question back to Tootie, our executive director, and to see, who she's engaged with. I wouldn't put it past her. I'm sure she has, because she's great at,
she's great.
We're here in New York. She has, yes, thank you. See? Put it out to the crowd. One of the things about Trudy Marr, Executive Director, is that she's an amazing networker and really understanding who do we need in the room and in the space to make things happen. And that's why I think with Pogo Park itself is somewhat like a Stone Soup type story, right? Here's the idea. What can you bring to it, right? And trying to uncover those ingredients, uncover that expertise in the community, those people with like-minded missions and ideas in the professional and academic spaces, and letting them bring what they have, those strengths, into the room and seeing what happens from there. And that's what really contributes to the iterative piece. But I will bring it up to Tootie. Maybe when you two come and visit, we could all sit down and talk about it.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Carol Naughton with Purpose Built Communities. I love this. This is a terrific example of a really creative and successful public-private partnership. And I'm interested in public-private partnerships that do all different kinds of things. And so I'd like you to take a step up from the ground level to maybe the 10 or 30,000 foot level. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what makes a good public-private partnership, whether we're talking about parks or something else. I'd love to particularly understand whether you've had to go through understanding one another's pain points and have gone through problem-solving processes to understand and address those pain points.
I think for me, the key thing between public and private partnerships, I mean, at least in Richmond, is that you get to know the community, you get to know the residents, you get to spend time there. Right away, I'm not from Richmond, so when I showed up there right away, like, where are you from? What are you doing? City has promised us many things, and they have not fulfilled it. The county has promised many things. The school district has promised many things. And for us, the only time that now that I think it's been 10 years of developing this relationship, but it's very fragile. Anything could happen at this moment, and that trust is gone like that. So in any of our public and private partners has been having that, what's it called, sustainable communication, and also support each other when there's none of that grant funding or none of that. Like, we're still in communication. Like, if there's a project that we're working on, but maybe it's over or it's ended, that we're still in communication and we might come back again and even come back stronger. That's also been the long-term relationship part, where we know that you're in for it, not just to come in and make profit and leave. So
I think to piggyback off of that, I think the key to it is that you have to show up when you don't want something. You know, if I only see you when you want something, I'm going to start screening your call. You know, and so, because in my role, I'm the director of research for Pogo. I'm not from that neighborhood. I'm from another neighborhood in Richmond, right? So that had its own issues when I first started working there. And then I left for a few years before I came back into this position while I'm getting my doctorate. But I also wear the hat of being the liaison from UC Berkeley when I'm there. And I had to learn quickly that I couldn't always just show up when it was time for data collection. Right? Or if I showed for a few weeks, I showed up for data collection and we needed to sand a fence. And so it's like, well, I guess I'm doing, some analysis at night because we're sanding fences right now. Right. Or
there was a homicide.
Right.
It just shuts all of us down. We all had to deal with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just being there, right? Being there when you're not asking for something, showing that that you actually care about people. And I think especially in communities that have been underserved, that have not been listened to, have not been valued, but know that they have expertise, know that they have the answers you're looking for, know that they have value in their own voice. Well, you have to show some of that value also. And I think, that's in showing up, but then that's also in one of Pogo Park's big thing that I'll go back to is in paying people for their time. We can all be working towards this long-term goal, but if my short-term goal is to pay the rent, you got to help me with that goal, right? You want me to believe in you, you got to believe in me.
And also with our academic partners, we're co-publishing, this work. Hey, we have a Richmond kid that needs to get into Berkeley. How are you going to support this student to, make their application stronger? Or grad student, or he's a prime example. It goes beyond that one-on-one.
So we got time for one more question. There's been a hand up right over here for a long time. Yes. Make it count.
Phyllis Meadows from the Kresge Foundation, and thank you for your great work. I think you partially answered my question, because one of the things that we've seen with a lot of community-based work, and I want your guidance on this, is that there's a change in momentum. The community starts out getting out there and they're really rocking, and then people leave or get real jobs, other jobs. And then, of course, as you listed on one of your slides, there's change in leadership, governmental leadership and local leadership. So I was just curious, beyond paying people, are there other things that you would advise to, keep that momentum, keep the tenet of activity going? So that's question number one. And then the second one is the purpose of why we're here, and that is what difference is this going to make to the health of people? So at the end, that's a tough question, because we can see the evidence of community being engaged, people actively taking a place in the work around health. But how do you make a sense of whether the community is getting better, or their health is better, or their well-being? And I don't mean health, just clinical health. I mean broadly.
Well, I'll speak to your the second question first, and that's actually the question we're asking ourselves right now. So we're doing a mixed methods, multi-part study on the health impacts of the redevelopment of Elm Play Lot since 2007. Two of those aspects are looking at the quantitative data. So looking spatially, have health indicators change using the publicly available data, like census, Richmond Community Survey, things like that. Doing a follow-up community survey to a study that wasn't published, but Pogo Park was able to own the data from 2008. And we're doing a follow-up study around social cohesion and neighborhood perception to see if anything there has changed around how people perceive their neighborhoods. And then also doing the qualitative piece, though, because understanding that statistics don't tell the full story. Right, so we're bringing our young people in. We did a youth photo voice project, which I mentioned earlier. And show of hands, who here is familiar with photo voice? Oh, cool. We're doing a youth photo voice project to understand how do young people today actually see their community, you know, and what are those things that we may be part of the discussion already, but aren't part of that, or you know, are they talking about in a different way? And then also really understand what are the drivers of community health throughout this process. So we're really trying to explore that to understand there's something we can feel when we're there. For the people who are doing the work, there's something that, you know, they definitely will swear by. But now let's use some of this opportunity we have with our academic partners to really get that story out there in a way that's been, you know, rigorously studied.
I mean, again, I think this is the third time I say it, but as a city, it's in your documents institutionally. I think we've had 3 or 4 now city managers since this work started. So, you know, that's important, you know, that it still continues because it's in our, actually we instituted it in our 5-year strategic business plan, which is also part of our budget, right? People say, you know, what's in your budget is basically the morality of your organization, right? So where is that in, where do you see that in your budget? Where do you see that in in any economic development plan that you have for your city? And I think for us long term, because we might move around as staff, but you know, it's there to be able to be picked up on again. And as far as some of the metrics, we have a city survey we do every 2 years, part of the National Clearinghouse for cities that we participate in. And these are some of our initial results from our you know, self-rated health is one determinant. I mean, one question people always ask. And actually, we push this survey that usually for cities to actually include this question, self-rated health, in this survey that goes into cities across the nation. And, you know, we're seeing some initial uptakes in it. And hopefully, you know, through our research work, that we're able to show some of these long-term gains.
I would say, and quickly to speak to your first point about how do you continue that relationship, for us it's been, since it is a smaller city, identifying those community leaders, right, that aren't necessarily the head of an organization. Our park host lives next door to the park, right? Brandon grew up next door to the park. Have these huge networks within the community. Trying to identify those folks and figure out how do we help hold them up, you know, while we're going through times of transition. And then when you are able to come back, well, I would say try not to just disappear, right? If you do have to leave a community, try to communicate that this is what's going on. Most of the time, community will understand or even saw it coming before you did. And when you show back up, you know, acknowledge that you've been gone, right? Acknowledge that you've been gone, that that there may have been, you know, not the best leaving. And find out from the community, what do you need to do to make amends, right? Because, things happen. But if we treat each other with respect and really try to acknowledge that and figure out how do we build from here, not assume that this is what we're going to do, I think that's when the relationship, there's that trust that starts to be rebuilt there.
So I want to thank Joe and Gabino.
Thank you.
And I want to thank all of our case study speakers for not only sharing their stories this morning and this afternoon, but for the work that they do each and every day. It's been a pleasure being with you, but I'm very delighted to hand this microphone off to Colby.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Excited to be here. I want to thank the Roundtable, Population Health Roundtable, for just having this really important, engaging conversation here today. And it's really a pleasure to be among such a group of leaders who are doing such incredible things in their community.